Hello, and welcome to What We've Learned. Series 3, again, Shane and Steve, another episode, another stellar. Shane, tell us about this stellar guest, if you will.
So today we have joining us Dom Hawes, who is CEO of the marketing group Selbey Anderson. And this series of podcasts is all about leadership. And Dom has some fascinating insights as to what makes great leaders, but also has had a very interesting and different career to get him to the place of being a leader today, not least because he started his career in the forces, in the army, as we'll hear, but also because he's gone on to do a multitude of other things, including he is himself a podcast host. He is, in fact, a very competitive sportsman and competes at elite level for rowing, and a couple of other things that will come out in the course of our chat.
Yes, don't give too much away, Shane. Very eloquent man with a brilliant passion, and what you'll hear, as you'll find out in a second, is quite how he's turned some of the things that have happened into his life, the negatives into positives, and how that's helped him to learn and indeed to strive forward with what he does with Selbey Anderson. So a really interesting listen for anybody who's interested in that world of mergers and acquisitions, or indeed just wants to understand from somebody who's been there on how to run an organization and to lead it brilliantly. So let's hear from Dom.
Good morning, Dom. Really welcome to our podcast, What We've Learned, all about this series, Leaders and Pioneers. So a big welcome to you.
Thank you very much. It's really, really good to be here. I'm looking forward to chatting to you guys.
My question for you, first question of the morning, is what do you think makes, or the characteristics make, a good or great leader? Because I'm sure you've seen good and bad through your career.
Yeah. Well, interesting question, and I think there are about 100 answers to it, I think, depending on the environment. But I think there are some threads that run through. You do know already, I know, because we've discussed this, but my background originally was military, and they have a very particular way of defining leadership in the military. There are indeed principles that you learn by rote when you're at the Royal Military Academy. I think in the real world, I say the real world, outside of the military, I think some of those things are more nuanced, but some of them ring really true. And I think the number one most important thing for a leader is integrity. I think you have to be able to stand by your beliefs, and you have to know what they are, and you have to be true to yourself as a leader, because if you're not, you very quickly lose your team. I think moral courage is supremely important. Having the guts to take unpopular decisions for the benefit of the business and the team. I think vision is very important, because people want to follow leaders that are going somewhere, not just walking in circles. I think resilience is very important, because leadership is an extraordinarily lonely place, particularly if you're having to call on your integrity and your moral courage a lot. It can get quite tricky. But I think a lot of the leaders I speak to, the number one not concern they have, but the thing they find hardest is the loneliness of leadership. It's very hard. There isn't really anybody, maybe other than one spouse, that you can share everything with if you're leading in a dynamic environment. I don't believe those private thoughts you have, or even the biggest, best, strongest leaders will have imposter syndrome at some stage, and somehow you need to see through it. And I think the pandemic was a really good example of that over the last 12 months. When it first happened, when lockdown first happened in March, I looked at what I thought was going to be happening over the next few months, and it looked very Kubler-Ross to me. It looked like this kind of period of denial and anger and frustration and all those various different steps. And I realized very quickly that if that's what the team was going to go through, I couldn't be seen to be wallowing or engaging in that kind of thing. So we sent a message straight out to our whole team about how important it was to be on the front foot. And yes, of course, we understood what was going on outside, but we couldn't afford to get caught up in that, and how it was very important to get really in the faces of our clients and do whatever we could to support them. And I think that kind of helped us through. But if I'm honest, and I don't have a problem admitting vulnerability myself either, I found it pretty hard going by the time lockdown got to an end, because I hadn't been able to admit any kind of weakness or show it. I didn't want my team to see that I was struggling, because if they did, that might have encouraged not encourage is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. People don't want to see that the person that's leading their business is struggling too much. So I did admit I think it was in December, I sent out a message to the team saying, look, I'd found this a bit hard, and I'm sure they probably had too. But that resilience, that being able to push on at all costs, is really important, and I think something that a lot of leaders struggle with.
It's interesting, Dom, because that last point leads to emotional intelligence as well, because there's a fine balance, isn't there? You've got to be the leader, as you say. Any group, whether it's work, whether it's social, whether it's military, as you say, if there's not somebody setting the compass and going in the right direction, then there's panic, there's fear, because nobody knows where we're going. But at the same time, you need that person to your point, be able to be human and say, look, actually, I'm not everything. I'm not bulletproof. There are weaknesses. It's finding that balance of when to say those things and when to not, to be galvanized and to push forward. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it is, absolutely. And I think, I realize the way I phrased that before might have come across that, and I'm not one of those, terribly toxic masculine leader types. We can't admit.
Not at all, Dom. It didn't come across like that. Absolutely.
You must be strong at all times. I mean, I think absolutely the opposite, actually. And without being cynical or manipulative, I think admitting weakness from a behavioral economics point of view gives one enormous strength, because we talk a lot, everyone in marketing talks a lot about authenticity, and part of being authentic and being believable and being real, maybe of having that integrity that I talked about before, is actually by admitting that we have weaknesses, that no one's perfect. And I think something we'll probably talk about a little bit later. I've written a chapter in a book where I really expose my biggest weaknesses, and I think it's okay to share those, because nobody is perfect.
I really like that, Dom. I mean, I think that's interesting. There's this balance, isn't there, between sharing a weakness, being able to be open about being vulnerable, but at the same time, that's not the same as imposter syndrome, i.e., I don't think I'm good enough to do that. But actually, people, I think, do confuse the two. I find that if they admit weakness, they're worried that they then might be seen as not up to the task. Is that something that you've ever encountered?
Look, like all people, I started out my marketing career in creative agencies, and I used to have terrible imposter syndrome. I used to, probably deservedly so at certain stages. But that, look, self-doubt, particularly when you're in an environment that's very fast growth, that actually sometimes you need to pinch yourself and just realize that the role is moving on, that the expectations of you as a leader are moving on. And over the last 2 years, the role that I do has changed enormously, and I'm basically not doing really any of the stuff that I used to do to start with. So when we started, it was basically a couple of us and a business plan, and therefore everything's going to be kind of hierarchical, and as the CEO of a company with no employees, you're directing everything. Now we're 125. I physically can't do it, but I'm trying as much as possible to surround myself with a team that challenge me, are more expert than me, are better than me in whichever areas they can be. So my role changes significantly from being a member of the orchestra to being a conductor, and I can't do what they do, but then I don't need to. So the imposter syndrome thing is kind of still there, but I think in different ways. And I think that as long as you can keep a track of where you add value and where your role in that business is helping drive the future, to me, that's how you combat imposter syndrome, because I know now what part I have to, I've always known, but I know where we are now, what I need to do over the next 24 to 36 months to take us from where we are to where we need to get to. So I don't have any kind of syndrome about that. But if you park me in front of a client to talk about, an integrated campaign over 4 territories, absolutely, the imposter syndrome will flood back, because frankly, it's not what I do anymore. So.
But it's not what you need to do, Dom. And again, I think that's back to good leadership, is recognizing not weaknesses, but where there are people that could be brought in that are better, more experienced, It's an overused analogy and a poor negative one often, but take a piece of precision engineering like a Swiss watch. It has a large number of small cogs, but without one of those cogs, that it doesn't work. So it's recognizing, well, what are the cogs I need around me, and let them do what they're good at, whilst you, as you say, play to your strengths, rather than feeling you need to own everything.
Yeah, so I've got a really interesting one on this, and it's a bit early, and I may sound like I'm certifiable on this one, but
you're being good.
I read a lot.
Don't worry.
So I read a lot, and I've just been reading all about the brain. David Eagleman's an extraordinary writer, and towards the end of the book I'm reading at the moment, the title of which escapes me, he starts talking about consciousness and emergence, and he uses the example of ant colonies and how ant colonies. And it's analogous to the brain, where obviously you've got cells that can't do much on their own, but when you put it together, consciousness emerges. And so he starts talking about the concept of emergence, and that really captivated me. And so that kind of is a nice way of explaining the whole is more than the sum of its parts, I guess. So my role really is, as a leader now, is about trying to encourage emergence across our group of agencies. And emergence isn't something that's been studied in great detail, certainly that I can find, since the early 1980s, and a couple of works on it then. So I'm looking at the moment into this whole concept of emergence, because actually, really my role is exactly as you just said, is to put more talented people with very highly specialized skills in the building, but look at how the right combination, the right structure, the right kind of rules of the game can create something that is genuinely unique and has sort of superpowers that others haven't got, because they don't have our unique DNA. And so that's something I'm looking into, kind of researching at the moment, how we might accelerate that process.
So that's really fascinating, because it's one of the analogies that I use when I talk to sort of marketeers who are trying to improve results, and all the focus is always about growth. And it's exactly that concept, is that you actually only need everybody in the team to do 0.5% better, and you add it all up, and it's a significant percentage. And that actually came out of the Team Sky thinking, which is the only other place that I've seen that sort of whole idea of emergence, and when you add everything together, everybody's little bit is so much more powerful. So I think it's really exciting, but I'm intrigued in terms of how you took that in to building the vision for the business of Selbey Anderson. We haven't touched on that yet, so perhaps can you explain a little bit about what it is you're trying to build, Dom?
Yeah, delighted. So my own agency experience was relatively short, actually. I had 6 years post-military, where I started out pretty much in the post room. I was an assistant account exec in a PR company, because the leap from military into marketing was not an easy one to make. So I had to start right at the bottom and work my way up. But I did that over 6 years, and I then kind of swapped sides for a little bit and went in-house as VP marketing at an investment company, and I then bounced back out and ran my own agency for a year before turning that into something else. So bizarrely, I've always seen marketing, and particularly agency, kind of as my home though throughout my career, although I haven't done it for the greater part of it. And I ended up in a bit of a hiatus, I guess, in 2012, and I looked at doing something along these lines then, but I didn't really have the ammunition or frankly the mental fortitude to do it, because starting something like this from scratch takes a toll. But by the time we got to 2018, 2019, I had, I think, got myself to a place where I knew I was ready, and I had a few additional skills actually that I picked up. I was consulting between 2012 and 2018, and I picked up a few additional skills that were going to be very useful, such as I'd worked through M&A and a few transactions, and I'd done a lot of quite detailed modeling work. So I found myself in 2018 with my co-founders looking at this business, partly as a business opportunity, because we all need to earn money to put food on the table and do that kind of stuff. But there were two key things that were the drivers for what we're doing right now. And one is a kind of carrot and one is a stick, I guess. I've always been obsessed by, I'm not obsessed, but Yeah, obsessed. I've always been obsessed by specialists, right? People that do things really, really well. And I think this plays to that emergence thing we were just talking about as well, that specialists only need to do the things they're specialist at. They don't need to do everything. And you can't get emergence if you've got a team of generalists. You can only get it if you've got a team of specialists, because otherwise everyone does the same stuff all the time, and you want everyone to be doing different stuff. That's what leads, I think, to the emergence. But so I've always been obsessed by specialists, and while I've got enormous respect for the big marketing networks, they're very big. They're very big, and by definition, then, you know, if we're using a shipping metaphor, they're oil tankers that take a long time to turn around, and we've seen that over the last few years. You know, it's been a tough old time for the big networks, but also I saw, you know, we I should say saw culture changing slightly, and clients starting to look at smaller agencies, smaller, more specialist agencies, because the whole digital sort of MarTech thing was happening. And although the big networks all have MarTech offerings, and in some cases highly sophisticated ones, in my opinion, they lacked that kind of agility and nimbleness that lots of clients were looking for. And so we started to see, you know, the kind of clients that small agencies would have killed for putting briefs out. So we set about trying to create a network that could offer a genuine alternative to network agencies. And that was extraordinarily arrogant and conceited, given that there were three of us in a spreadsheet. But that was our vision to start with. It's like, how do we create a genuine alternative to the really big companies? And that was the driver from a client point of view. But also, you know, I'd been through a process in 2012 where, you know, I always open my own meetings with, I'm the guy that thought he'd sold a company but ended up having to sell his house. It's the family house, actually, not mine. So I'm acutely aware of what a poor sale process looks like, and I've been on the receiving end of some very bad behaviour from an acquirer. So when we were putting this together, we wanted to be the home of choice for great agencies, great independent agencies, and there were a bunch of things that we wanted to do. I mean, actually, look at its simplest level. We were trying to say, let's prove that you don't have to be a complete moron, a greedy, avaricious, cynical. I can't swear, but you know what I mean. To make it in the world. Let's prove that you can build something really big and valuable and sustainable by being good guys. And that was part of the drive. And now that helps if you're trying to attract marketing agencies, which are generally run by highly intelligent, highly creative, and extremely sensitive. You know, they've got very high EQ ratings, a lot of the people we speak to, and they don't want to go and work for someone that's going to change what they've spent 15 years creating. So being the home of choice to kind of the best of the best was kind of important to us too. And there's a bunch of behaviors that we brought in right from day one, to make those principles live within the group, and they're still here today.
It's interesting, Dom, because you've just articulated. You started with the word integrity when Shane asked the first question today, and what you've just articulated there is that on that other side of, if we're going to acquire, we can do it with integrity. We don't have to be insert swear word of other ways of doing it. But you mentioned super tankers. It sounds like, if I may, it's almost you're building a flotilla at this point. You've got lots of these vessels together. I'd be interested. I've got two questions for you, Dom, and pick one or both as you wish. But firstly, how do you manage as a leadership team that flotilla? Because they've all got to go in the same direction, but they are all different vessels. They're different agencies. That must be a really interesting challenge. And any thoughts on the good or the bad of that? And secondly, there may well be people listening in that are on the other side. Somebody gave me very sage, obvious advice years ago and said, look, no one ever sells an agency or an organization or a business. They get bought. And I wonder if there's any pointers for people that might be on that side that are considering, well, how do I build something for to be acquired? What do you look for? What's important? Are there learnings from that?
Okay, yes, two very good questions. And if I can remember them, by the time.
Well, first one's the flotilla. How do you keep that flotilla together?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. And I think so. We had in the early days, it was easy. So it was kept together by a kind of traditional hierarchical structure where, everyone reported into a blob at the top, and everyone is accountable. I'm accountable to the board and to the investment committee of our group. So we had that kind of that arrangement. But when we passed the 100 people mark, and the number of ships in our flotilla, if I can continue the metaphor,
You're welcome.
that becomes almost impossible, because, as you say, there are too many directions, too many things going on. You need to know too much, and actually it's just not possible. So we went through a process in Q4 last year where we were looking at the problem and saying, how are we going to do it? And my thinking was influenced by the emergence of DevOps, actually, as a practice within technology, and how the principles and ideals that had driven DevOps we could utilize. Things like decentralization, locality and simplicity, pushing out the decision making as far as possible into the organization, so that everyone understands exactly what they can and can't do as part of their role in order to achieve the objective. And in the military these days, I think they call that commander's intent, I think they call it. So that was part of it. It was about getting things decentralized as much as possible, but also it's about creating an environment where people can do their best work. Now, I can't say what that environment is from the center, because frankly, I don't know. So we adopted, we were looking at decentralization, and actually, of course, someone else had already done the work. Stanley McChrystal wrote a book about what he calls team of teams, and we adopted the team of teams structure within the group. So we created a panel called the Agency Management Board, which is run by the MDs of select agencies within the group. And so effectively the agencies within the group run the group, the agency side of that. So, and that changes the role of our central leadership from being a kind of command and control to being a strategy and a facilitation role. So that was the way that we've managed that. And effectively, actually, I'll tell you who else did this really well, is Clive Woodward with the British rugby team. When he went on to win the World Cup, he had the teamship principle, the principle being those people making decisions should be, if you've got to live with a decision, you should have a say in making it. And that was actually originally the driving force before I came across the team of teams concept. And team of teams has allowed us to develop the management thinking a little bit further. But basically, we have a completely decentralized structure now. So we have a strategy centrally. We know where we're going. We changed the structure of the group actually away from what was the kind of traditional matrix group. If you imagine, build a picture of this. On the left-hand side, you have all the different practices within marketing and communication. So there'll be public relations or direct marketing or integrated or whatever on the left-hand side. And on the other axis, you have vertical markets. So we started out thinking very much along matrix lines, but we reorganized based around a life cycle practices based on the kind of things we believe our clients are looking for, depending on the stage of a product life cycle that they are in. So it's a bit hard to describe in words. It's a bit esoteric. But for example, we have an innovation practice, which is all about product marketing. So product creation, research, analysis, doing gap analysis for FMCG products to help them create products to fill voids in their markets. Through enablement, which is building out the digital tools people need to either to do B2B e-commerce or self-service systems online. Acquisition is the next practice, a big practice, that one. So that's direct marketing, advertising, etc. There are a couple of other practices, and then communication, which runs all the way along the product life cycle. So we think now, or I'm trying to encourage us to think very much more about how our customers either are or should be thinking about the life cycle, and by doing that, we've created a structure within the group where the agencies can remain, certainly in ethos, genuinely independent. Now, all the agencies, of course, we have proper corporate governance, are accountable to their own boards, so they have to have their own strategy and their own structure, and their own strategy should fit within part of the group's strategy, or frankly, they're an orphan. But they have to contribute to the whole. But we do have a unique DNA, I think, where agencies can remain genuinely independent, certainly in culture, feel, and outlook. And there are some elements, of course, that are centralized and that are standardized, and there are some elements that are not. And we talk a lot about core and context, and they're just particular phrases that we've adapted to ourselves. And core for us are those things that clients would probably pay more for. It's the really highest value work we do, and context is everything else. And so we try and make core in the agencies highly personalized, highly differentiated, and the custody of the culture around that core belongs to the agency, and we don't play a part in that. The context, we probably could and should be able to help the agency with. So, that's, for example, all the bookkeeping and things like that, the legal side, we can centralize and take that off their plates, because I still haven't met anyone that said they got into the creative business because they want to work spreadsheets. So that's how the flotilla hopefully heads in the same direction. But if a small gunship wants to go off on a small foray, as long as it's heading the right direction, that's fine. And then in terms of what we look for, or what agency owners can do. So I think you're right. I have met a couple of agencies where, I've said why. My first question normally is, why are you selling? And a couple of agencies said, well, we started the company so we could sell it one day. And for someone like me, that's a dreadful answer. So if you're listening to this and you ever want to speak to me about selling your agency to us, don't say that.
Start with that.
Because the meeting will be very short. So look, a lot of the agencies that I want to buy are not for sale. That's just the reality. Or if they are for sale right now, it's because the leaders are reading the runes and are needing. They've got to a stage in their own evolution where they need to join something, or they perceive they need to join something bigger. Now, there's a point in an agency's evolution where they have three basic choices, in my opinion. They can continue doing exactly what they're doing. They can sell to a company like ours, or they can become a platform to start acquiring other people. And I'm sure there are loads of other opportunities, but from where I sit, those are the three options. And I increasingly come across agencies who are wrestling with that issue. And I think any one of those points is a perfectly valid, or choice is a perfectly valid strategy for an agency when they get to that kind of size. But actually, it doesn't matter whether an agency is small, medium, or large. And one of the things I struggle with is it's all about talent. Actually, when it comes down to it, it literally is all about talent. Because you can have a really big agency that's kind of financially successful. It's hitting average KPIs, it's doing average work, it's averagely large, but that's not going to be exciting if you're trying to encourage emergence and do things that other people can't do. It's just not exciting. So I'm on a mission always to try and find and unlock hidden talent in agencies. Simon's really big on hidden talents in people. We even have a hidden talents campaign that he's announced and run, where we audit the skills of the people, and everyone has a personalized training plan within the group. And we tend to think quite long term about stuff. So we're thinking about, what kind of agency do we want to be? Do we want to say we are in a year's time? How do we train ourselves to get there? And so he'll run a hidden talents campaign. Similarly, I'm looking to try and find and unlock hidden talent in agencies. So and that isn't necessarily related to size. So being the biggest doesn't get you a suitor. Being the smallest, life's a little bit harder, I think, to find a suitor. But if the talent's there, if there's a unique model or unique talent or unique IP, then I think that's different. In terms of the specific question of what would I advise an agency owner to do if they want to sell, firstly, you've got to do great work. The work has got to be absolutely out of the park. I think if you want to sell, look, let me just roll back a bit. There are lots of people like me in this market who are, and there are more and more actually. I've come across 4 new groups doing what we're doing in the last 3 weeks. Some of them have trying to do the no money down thing. They're trying to buy agencies without spending any money. Good luck to them. It's a hard old way to try and make a living, and you end up bottom feeding. There are some, I've come across one who's trying to do the whole equity roll-up model again, where they'll give you shares in the parent company instead of, we do cash only, I have to say. That's part of the smarts I took out of my own failure. I had lots and lots and lots of shares in something that wasn't worth anything. So there are lots of different people like us out there looking to buy agencies. So honestly, if you want to sell, you probably can, but be very careful, I think, of what you join, because life gets pretty miserable if you join the wrong thing. And I'm conscious I'm rambling, but it's a big,
not rambling
really
at all,
big,
Dom. I mean, I think that you've shared so
really
much
big question.
there. It's a
really
huge question,
yeah.
and I think it's really interesting. You make a point there with loads of points that people will take away that really resonates with me, because I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. And I think often when you learn, when you build businesses and you do end up selling, timing is everything. And I think recognizing timing, and I was a board director at 28, and along came the opportunity to take part in a management buyout backed by 3i. And my initial reaction was, I can't possibly do this. I've just taken out first mortgage on a house with my husband. Where am I going to find the money? Luckily, my other half's reaction was, you'd be a complete muppet not to do it. We'll find the money. So timing and that sort of convergence of your personal drive and your business drive. I think something that came up on other guests that we've had chat about, that you might found a business for one reason, to earn income. And then as you grow, it becomes bigger, it becomes a different beast, as you say, and the challenges change. Some people relish those changes. Some people actually don't like the fact that they're suddenly not doing the things they love doing. And I think there's an opportunity there often with agencies, as you say, to release that talent back to what they're passionate about. And I think that tip about thinking about your talent and what you want personally, and where that best fits, is certainly what I would always say when somebody's looking. It's not often just about selling, it's about the life choices increasingly.
Yeah. I think it's a really valuable addition to that as well, which is when selling, it's easy for me to say because I'm on the buy side, but equally it's not just about price, right? So obviously if you're exiting something, you want to exit and maximize your earning potential as you're exiting, but an exit's going to be over a period of time, and you can probably talk to this better than I can, Shane. But when you're exiting, you've also got to be able to live with choices. And I think one of the very first blogs I produced was about an aligned approach to transactions or to deal making rather than an adversarial approach. So an adversarial approach in this context is a disaster as far as I'm concerned, because it's hard to recover from what happens during the adversarial process, and we've all got to be bedfellows for 3 years. So we again, as part of our kind of integrity, I guess, and not, we don't try and screw people down to the floor. There's no point. We're looking at a fair price for the agency because we want everyone to make it to the end of their earn out. If we didn't do that, we wouldn't be able to attract the best agencies. So for us, so what can you do to sell your agency? A, know who you are. B, know what your value is. But C, be prepared to have a discussion rather than a fight about what value is and how it's released. Because I think, virtually almost all agencies are saleable, whatever. And we've done 8 transactions. I've taken 10 right to the wire, but I've probably looked at well north of 200 agencies now and had advanced discussions probably with about 40, 50, something like that. And none of the structures, no 2 of those structures that we looked at for the actual deal were going to be the same. None of them. So be clear about what you want, I think, before we go into a transaction is really important too.
And Dom, you touched on your experience of this as well, that must help greatly when you're on that side of the table. But I wonder if we can just slightly change direction. You talked a bit about your kind of personal story, and there's a book that's just been published, Purposeful People, where you're an incredibly good company with a lot of other leaders that have contributed their tales. I wonder if you could just chat a bit about that book and particularly your contribution, what you've talked about in there and
Sure.
how that relates to today.
Sure. So the process of writing the book was fabulous, actually. So Chris Payton, who put the project together, approached me, I think halfway through 2020, kind of mid-pandemic, to say, hey, we're thinking about doing this. And we talked about imposter syndrome earlier. Interestingly, out of the 20, well, there were 19 other authors and Chris. And each one of the 19 went back to him saying, with imposter syndrome, saying, I'm not sure I belong in this company. I shouldn't be writing a chapter, which is really interesting. But it's a really good, so it supports 4 charities. And it was pitched as a charitable project to start with. But the concept is to get 20 people from completely different backgrounds, completely different walks of life, with completely different experiences, to put down on paper what they think their personal purpose is about, how it came about, if there's any kind of academic or model rigor that you could put behind the thesis that you're presenting in your chapter, to try and create an anthology that would be supportive to other people in the same situation. And I think the outcome, I say the outcome because I will confess that I haven't read the book yet, because I haven't got my hands on the paper copy, and I don't like reading books on digital devices. I really like having paper in my hands. So I'm eagerly awaiting the delivery, which I think is coming this week. But I have seen the précis, obviously, and the summary of all the other chapters. And it is an astounding achievement what Chris and the team have produced. So my chapter, I was very clear what I wanted to write about from the start, because the purpose I have now, my purpose is all about creating an environment where makers can flourish. And so my chapter's on makers and takers. I tend to be a little bit polar in my thinking, that, things either come into 2s, so completely polar, or sometimes there'll be 3s. But I very much learnt the hard way, again, in my opinion, that there are makers and takers in the world. And takers are the kind of people that will ask you, what's in it for me? And makers are the people that will say, what can I do for you? And actually, Adam Grant, he wrote a really good book on exactly this subject, and he's got the academic background and rigor to back it up. But I always believed that the makers, the people who are collaborative and constructive and paid it forward, were people that deserved and should thrive more than those who take and who take off other people. And so my book, my chapter was about that, actually, because I happened to get into the biggest transaction of my life to date, with someone who was a taker, and she absolutely destroyed me, my business, my home. It was a really very, very, very difficult period of my life. And when things like that happen as an entrepreneur, it's not just obviously you that's affected. Those nearest and closest to you also get really badly affected by it. So, Nicola, my wife, was very badly affected. My parents, my twin brother, they were lending me money as fast as they could possibly lend me money to stay afloat, while I tried to sort things out. And then there are friends, because as one builds the business, you kind of like doing business with people you like, and so some of my creditors were personal friends. So when the thing went down, it was a really, really painful experience. So I felt like I wanted to write a cautionary tale, because I'd made some really elementary blunders, actually, and I just wanted to share them, so that others reading it might just pause to think and say, okay, in my circle, who's a maker and who's a taker? And the advice I give in the chapter is, if you find a taker, you just got to cut them out of your life as fast as you can, because really, you only get one go at your career, and you've got to enjoy it. And therefore, if there are people on that ride who are interfering with your enjoyment, you've just got to cut them out, however painful it is. And so that's what, without spoiling any more, there's a bit more detail in it, but that's what the chapter's about.
I think the perfect teaser rather than a spoiler. I definitely am signing up to read that, and I think that it's really great and heartening, Dom, that you're prepared to share. I wish I'd known, because I don't know for what reason, but many of us perhaps leave it a little late to share that advice. And it's that sort of openness. Yes, I've made some mistakes, which actually I don't want you to make that, because it's very painful, and it's really similar and resonates to me as part of that buyout that I took part in, I was super excited. I thought, this was it. We were going to be taking this business, which was around 3 million, to probably a 50 million pound company. I was 28. I was very ambitious.
Wow. Yeah.
Realised that my other 6 fellow directors, only after we'd done the deal, had thought they'd bought their pension. And that they weren't takers in the context that you've said it, but it was definitely a different vision of where we were going. And of course, I wanted to invest back into the business, grow, and they wanted to invest in their families and personal future. They basically thought they were buying a lifestyle business. And I didn't even see that coming before I went into the deal. And I think for everybody to reflect, as you say, the people you work with, what you get from them, the deals you do, who you do them with. Very wise words, Dom. So any other final words sort of to share with the listeners in terms of what we've learned? You've shared masses, but one final piece of advice, perhaps back to yourself when you were leaving the army, we wished you'd known when you'd started out the career you have today.
Yeah, so when I left, and for a long time I carried around a portfolio of 86 rejection letters with me. But then those were only the good ones, because of course the really bad ones just don't reply to applications. Look, all of us can do far more than we think we can. I think is what I've learned along the way, that you really are only limited by your own self-doubt and self-belief. That if human beings are amazing things. If you set your mind to something, you go about it with purpose, you actually can achieve it. Now, I'm not just saying, I could think I want to be an astronaut and in 3 years' time I'll be one, or even that I could be an astronaut, because that's beyond the realms of reality. But we are able to do a lot more than we think. And I think that when I left the army, and I wanted to get into the marketing services business, I just didn't go about it in a very smart way. I just started writing lots of letters, and I threw them away in the end, by the way, because I realized it was me with the problem, not the people who were rejecting me. I wasn't making it very easy for them to hire me. But I think have that self-belief. If you want to do something, if you want to achieve something, whether that be starting a business, whether that be, becoming a champion in a sport or whatever, you just got to sit down and think systematically. Is it realistic? Can I achieve it? If I wanted to do it, how would I do it? And then go for it.
Brilliant stuff there from Dom. Very thoughtful, Shane. Very, very detailed as well in terms of, and for a man on the fly, just giving those answers, it's clear that he's got a completely different way of looking at a space that he's in, and a very healthy one as well. But didn't come easily. He's obviously learned from different points in his life, the negatives and how you can turn those into a positive. So really, really interesting stuff. Or at least I thought so. What about you, Shane? What did you think?
I agree. And I also felt that there was a great clarity over the skills that Dom believes leaders need, and demonstrated many himself, but talking about mental fortitude, integrity, moral courage, which I think increasingly in the world today is one we need to value above all others, actually. Vision, resilience. But he also, very touchingly, I felt, talked about the fact that it can be lonely at the top. And I think that's a really interesting one. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think so. It's one of those kind of exclusive clubs that until you're in there, you close the door behind you and go, oh, it is. I mean, that cliche, it's lonely at the top. But recognizing that, and as he's with his flotilla, ensuring, and that's the beauty of having the right kind of network of agencies, is that you've got that safe harbor, if I can use the pun still, that leaders can share from others, because you can't always go, or maybe it doesn't always feel like you can go too close to home to go and learn, or to ask the stupid questions, or whatever it may be. And we talked about imposter syndrome as well. I can experience that, Shane. I've been there on my own, and recently, having done a merger where I've got a business partner, just in the first few weeks of going through that, and having somebody that you can trust and that you can bounce things off, I can go from that loneliness to that of having a safety net, a running mate, a muse, all sorts of different things that come with having another. And I guess, as Dom said, the two sides to the coin, that you've got people at home, and when it's going well, you've got people that can really help, but equally those people, your family, can get dragged into it. I thought we made some really excellent points about if things don't go right, the impact for not just you but those around you as well.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, isn't it? It's not being lonely at the top. It's not always about having someone telling you that you're right and you're doing the right thing, although that's always very nice. But actually, equally, and I find what I relish is it's the people who do give it to you straight, who tell you, in no uncertain terms. And I'm lucky to be surrounded by family who are, not shy in telling me when I've got it wrong, which is good for me. But it's having someone to challenge you and think differently. And I think that's what often, being lonely at the top, you're not necessarily after affirmation all the time, but just someone to challenge you and push you think differently. And that's great news, Steve, that you've got a partner both in life at home to do that, but also to do that in a work sense now with your new merger, which is very exciting news. So congratulations.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. Yeah, and it's an interesting one, because you could say, well, at least being on your own, you're captain of your own ship, if I carry on this analogy, sorry. But having a business partner is not always easy, and you and I have both in the past had business partners that are not always ideal. So there's good and bad of being on your own, and indeed with others. But certainly, yeah, having a sounding board is a really important thing. And that doesn't mean you need to bring in a business partner, Shane, either. I don't think. You can have a trusted number two that is somebody who is honest enough with you, as you say, or indeed just, arrives at the same decision that gives you the confidence that, as Dom's making decisions, having somebody who knows the direction of travel is really important. And if people back that up and agree, then, it's going to make that journey much, much easier, much, much smoother, if I may.
And that's to Dom's sort of second point, really, about, surround yourself with makers. They don't need to be formally involved. They can be, there are people who will give of their time. We have been so fortunate with our series of podcast recordings that people have given their time to talk about their experience. And these are all makers. They're all giving back. And I think we can, take that thought with us as we sail off into this end of this podcast, because we had to get another sailing analogy.
We did, yeah, we did. I think we must have to drop anchor now, Shane, otherwise people are going to kill us. It's an overstretched set of analogies. Anyway, listen, I hope you've enjoyed that. Well, I certainly did, and I know Shane did too. Big thanks to Dom for giving up his time and for sharing his wisdom. And a thanks to you for listening in. We'll see you at wwlpodcast.co.uk. We'll see you on LinkedIn if you look for WW What We've Learned podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts from. We're in all of those places. We'd love to hear from you. And if we don't hear from you, we hope you enjoy listening. See you soon. Thanks, everyone.